Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining today's BBC Climate Lecture. Before starting with the talk, I will give you a quick introduction about our initiative. We are the climate group at the Max Perutz Labs, a grassroots initiative funded at the end of 2019. Our aim is to promote sustainability in research labs. You can scan the QR code here and check our previous lectures on our YouTube channel. And you can also feel free to send us your feedback, ideas, if you want to collaborate, if you have any other questions. Our email address is here on this slide. So, today's speakers, Kirsty, Pringle, and Loïc Lannelongue, are from the Institute of Digital Sustainability. Today they will talk a little bit about the problem of the environmental impact of computational biology, and they will introduce the GreenDiSC tool, which is a new certification scheme providing a roadmap for researchers who want to tackle the environmental impact of their computational work. Very often this is neglected, but I'm reading it from the website, the GreenDiSC website. The global footprint of data centers is estimated at 126 megatons of CO2 equivalents per year, corresponding to the entire US commercial aviation. So for sure, there is a lot to learn about it. Having said that, I would leave it to Kirsty. Afterwards, we will have a question and answer session. Feel free to add your questions in the chat already from now, and I will read them at the end. Or you can raise your hand at the end of the talk, and you can ask the question directly. Kirsty, I will leave it to you.
Okay, thank you for that introduction. Let me just share my screen. So I'm going to start with a little bit of an introduction onto the Software Sustainability Institute, which is the organisation I work for. A little bit of background about the organisation, and then a little talk about some of the activities we've been doing through the Software Sustainability Institute around sustainability, which includes GreenDiSC, and then I'll pass over to Loïc, who's going to talk more about the certification itself. So as I said, I work for an organisation called the Software Sustainability Institute. Interestingly, the Software Sustainability Institute hasn't done environmental sustainability for very long. It's really been focused so far on kind of sustainable software in terms of how to create software and how to support researchers to use software. So we have the motto, better software, better research, kind of really motivated by the idea that most researchers use software in some way in the research they do. There's very little kind of support and skills and training to help researchers use software more efficiently. SSI was originally founded back in 2010, so we were one of the first organizations in the world to really focus on supporting research software. And we basically kind of advocate for the importance of research software and for the importance of people that that actually do the development of the research software to make sure that they're recognized and their vital role in research is recognized. We do lots of different activities. I'm just going to talk about a couple of them really quickly. One of them is around training. We do a lot of training. We both develop and deliver training materials. Often these kind of have a software carpentry style to them. We try and do entry-level training and also more advanced training as well. One of the kind of newer things we started to do is called research software camps, where we try and aim this training to people that aren't familiar with using software at all. So these are people that perhaps use Excel and maybe quite complicated spreadsheets, but aren't kind of confident to kind of move over to using software. So we try or research kind of coding. So we try and support people kind of showing the advantages and kind of showing some of the kind of research efficiencies which can be gained from using software, some of the resources they can use to support them in their software. Another thing we do is the fellowship program. So you can see lots of faces on the screen. You should see Loïc there because he's a fellow. So the fellowship program, basically what we do is it doesn't pay your salary, but it does pay a little bit of money, a couple of £1,000 to help you run events, deliver training, that kind of thing. But what it also gives you access to is a lot of mentorship and networking opportunities. We try and get the fellows to work together to support each other in their developing their ideas. It's predominantly a UK scheme, but there are opportunities for international fellows as well. Something we trialed in the last couple of years that's going really well. And then we also finally, in just a bit over a year ago, we kind of formally included environmental sustainability within our work. We've done a couple of different things in this. The first is GreenDiSC, which you'll hear about today, which is the new certification scheme, which Loïc will talk about. The other thing that we've been working on in terms of environmental sustainability is kind of trying to create a bit of a community around what we've called green research software engineering. So these are people, research software engineers, people that work very closely with both researchers, but with a software engineering specialty. And we're kind of really thinking about how we can kind of help, how these people could potentially help this kind of green transition that's needed. So how can we help kind of decarbonize research using the skills that they have? So the people on here are part of on this slide are part of the steering committee of the Green Research Software Engineering Special Interest Group. Is run in collaboration with the Society for Research Software Engineering. So the UK has a National Society for Research Software Engineering, and they have special interest groups that kind of like focus work, taking people from the community to work on topics which align with their aims. So really what we just wanted to kind of to say that we are kind of trying to create a community around this. So this photo is from our launch event, which was at RSCCon, which is the UK National RSC Conference last September, where we kind of did a co-creation session. We asked people, how could green RSCs help accelerate the transition? What's the role of a research software engineer in helping to green research, to green digital research? And we took the findings from this study along with a couple of other studies, and we basically used that to form our special interest group. We formed kind of main aims, one around identifying and promoting best practices for environmental responsible research software. So that's kind of how can we use our skills to kind of understand what the best practices are. Another is around collaborating on solutions, for example, energy efficiency of code, incorporating green practices into software lifestyle management. Also to advocate for green policies within research institutions. So at the moment, a lot of the research institutions in the UK are looking into green policies, but there's not been that much kind of concrete come out. So we want to make sure that anything that does come out is achievable and can be done in a way that kind of supports research. And so we're kind of trying to work out how we can support the development of those policies so that they are effective. And also to champion the role of research software engineers. Research software engineers are vital throughout the research landscape. And we want to make sure that if they do play a role in reducing the environmental impact of research software, then that's recognised as well. So yeah, final slide is just a little bit of a plug to come and join us if you're interested. We have a mailing list. It's a GISC mail, but I'll pop the list, the actual link in the chat just after this. Feel free to sign up to our mailing list for updates. Our main Slack channel is on the UK RSC Slack, but you don't need to be in the UK to join it. Everyone's welcome. So we have a GreenSig Slack channel on there, which we just use to kind of start basically to discuss any topics that come up and see if we can collaborate a little bit on finding solutions for them. So we're really open and we're interested in this initiative that you guys here is great, really open to finding out more and to collaborating more as much as possible. Okay, thank you. With that, I can hand over to Loïc, who's going to talk through the GreenDiSC.
Great, thank you so much. Just need to find the right screen to share. Yeah. So I was also asked to just do a brief background on like environmental impact of computing. So I'll start to do that to keep you waiting a little bit, and then I'll talk about GreenDiSC at the end. But I promise I won't overrun. So here we are. Compulsory disclaimer at the start. I'm not here to say computing is horrible, we shouldn't do any compute. My background is in statistics and machine learning and computational biology, so I'm very aware of all the benefits that computing brings. I've cherry-picked some examples here of like kind of very cool discoveries. There are many more. I'm sure you all have examples from your fields. Where it gets interesting for the topic of today is this idea of using AI and using computing to fight climate change, doing better weather forecasting, helping to reintroduce biodiversity and things like that. And that's really important. No doubt there are lots of applications. The problem is it also comes with huge environmental impact, and we need to make sure we put we balance it right. So if we look at the environmental impact of scientists, there are loads of numbers, but they're all like up to 40 tons per person per year, which if we compare that to the IPCC target of 2 tons per year and per person, that's a lot higher and something to keep in mind. If we focus on the ICT sector, it's about between 2 and 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So that's actually more than the entire aviation sector. And there's this study from a few years ago that looks at different forecasts for the ICT, so information and communication technology, basically the digital sector, roughly. And all these forecasts, they can't agree on anything. The one thing they can agree on is that it's going up. And that's something we need to be mindful of, and I don't think it's going to surprise anyone. Nicola, in introduction, I actually used this number. So this is kind of a big, scary number for data centers everywhere, and something we need to be mindful of. So if we look at bioinformatics, I've picked some bioinformatics analysis. Don't worry if they don't ring any bell. Some of you, may be working in this space. The first one is GWAS, so that stands for Genome-Wide Association Study. Doesn't matter, every time you read a paper that says we found the gene for X, that's what they did. And not well optimized, you end up with 17 tons of CO2 equivalent, which would take about 100 years to 15 trees to sequester that much for just this not incredibly rare analysis. Metagenome assembly, you take a soil sample, you try to figure out what's in there. We're talking kilograms, and then RNA read alignment. This particular one, we're talking grams. And the point of this slide is to say, we don't need to get completely paranoid about everything we do on a computer. Some analyses have quite small carbon footprint, and we don't need to overthink it. But some projects can have disproportionately high environmental impact, and the fact that these exist mean that we have to be careful more generally and make sure that when that happens, we're able to make reasonable decision and responsible decisions. So that's for pure bioinformatics. AI is all the rage these days. So there was this study from a couple of years ago looking at large language models. GPT-3, the first row on the table, that's the last open model, the ancestor of ChatGPT, basically, the last time it was open before they released it. And the carbon footprint of GPT-3, it was estimated 550 tons. Again, compared to the 2 ton per year per person we were talking about before, that's quite a lot more. It's particularly interesting because these numbers, they only to train it once. They don't include the research, they don't include the development, they don't include retraining, just the one-off training. So that's scarily big. And that's probably the big problem we're facing here, is that computing isn't free, especially in research. But it may look like it from a user point of view. And that's great. The fact that researchers can do quite low-cost compute is part of the reason why we've been able to do so much research, as opposed to if we had to, pay for cloud providers all the time. The problem for something that has no cost is there are no incentives not to waste it. And I'm sure you all have examples, if you do computational work, of massively wasted compute time just because, it doesn't really matter. And that's kind of the problem. We end up in this situation where, I'm based in the Department of Public Health in Cambridge. And that means that, a lot of what my department works on is the environmental impact of climate change. And so you're like, well, how much compute do we need to burn to kind of stop being a net benefit to the problem we're solving? And that's the point of this presentation and of GreenDiSC, is to be able to understand our environmental impact, so we make sure we don't make more damage than expected benefits. So what environmental impacts are we talking about? That's what can make it quite complicated, is there are a lot of different ways to lots of different ways to talk about that. One way to think about is to compare embodied footprint versus use stage or operational. Operational is when you use the device, it uses electricity. That's what we're talking about. Embodied footprint is everything else. It's fabrication, distribution, end-of-life treatment. So, you know, from extraction of raw materials, all these environmental impact that we tend to forget. If we look at your phone, your laptop, your tablet, 70 to 95% of the cradle to grave, so of this total footprint is production only. And that's critical because it means in the case of your smartphone, you know, how you use it doesn't matter so much. The single best thing you can do is to just keep your smartphone for longer, so you save these 90% from being generated again. In the case of servers for data centers, you know, we're talking 15 to 60%. So the only reason it's lower is not because they're cleaner to manufacture, it's just because they use so much more. But this aspect is key to think about keeping hardware for longer. That's why it's so important. If we go at the other end of the spectrum, we get end-of-life treatment, and there's this quite sobering report from the World Health Organization saying that over 80% of the 50 million tons of electronic waste are handled by between 12 and 15 million of what they call informal waste workers. So, you know, almost 20 million children involved in the waste processing industry. That's mostly dump sites. And so that's a real critical issue with electronic waste predicted to rise. We go back to this previous idea of trying to keep hardware for longer because we're really, really terrible about recycling it. Another way to look at it, which won't be any kind of brand new if you're familiar with sustainability in general, is great to talk about carbon footprint, but it's not enough. And actually, you know, I've been guilty of that in this talk so far. I've only talked about tons of CO2 equivalent. We need to also think about the broader environmental impact. One example is this article that states that a medium-sized data center uses as much water as 3 average-sized hospitals. Now, a couple of things. I have no idea how true that is. I also have no idea how much water an average-sized hospital uses. One thing I do know is I'm pretty much sure it shouldn't be a comparison, right? We shouldn't compare data centers with hospitals. That shouldn't be the same order of magnitude of water usage, especially because we know how to build data centers without continuous water. So there are ways to deal with that. This plot is very messy, but you can kind of ignore most of it. If you look at the categories on the left, each category is a standardized way to look at environmental impact and look at different impacts. Climate change here in the middle, that's the only one that is, when we talk about carbon footprint and when we talk about tons of CO2 equivalent, we're talking about climate change here, that one. We're not talking about all the other impacts, which means we can be missing out on these other ones. They're mostly self-explanatory. Some of them are a bit more technical, but you know, things like land use, acidification, freshwater ecotoxicity, water usage, and so on. And so these are really critical categories to think. And basically this plot, what they're trying to do here on the right is to map these environmental impact onto planetary limits. So, you know, how much can we use of the Earth's resources if we don't want to be worse off at the end of the year than we were at the start? Anyway, it doesn't really matter, but it's just to show that this is a complicated question, and sometimes something that just reduces CO2 emission is not enough because, you know, that can cause issues elsewhere. And then there's the balance between computing and storage, and that's quite an important one. If we look at an average data center, only 50% of the electricity we provide to the data center are actually going into the servers. The rest is like 10% storage and 40% overheads, which is mostly cooling. And so that, you know, that's critical. And 10% for storage is actually not negligible. As I'm sure, we're terrible at deleting data. And that's good for some aspects, and we shouldn't be like over deleting data, but we shouldn't be storing everything either. So if we, quick rule of thumb, the carbon footprint of storing data, if you want a very rough calculation, is just an order of magnitude, is 10 kilograms of CO2 equivalent to store 1 terabyte of data for a year. Now that number may seem like not a lot at all to you if you store a few gigabytes of data. But if you are working in this kind of like big data world where projects very easily reach petabytes of data, then obviously you can see how that adds up very quickly. Now, if we want to understand the carbon footprint of whatever we're doing with computers, the operational one, it's reasonably easy. You need to understand how much energy you need, and that's mostly decided by the hardware and the software. What are you doing? And then you need to see to find the carbon footprint of producing that much electricity, and that tends to be called carbon intensity. So there's an excellent website called Electricity Map that does that, and you can see they've got data for all the countries. You can zoom in on your country, and you can see where electricity is imported, what kind of electricity is being generated, hydro or solar panels or nuclear or coal or gas or so on. And so that's really interesting. So we got very detailed data. One of the data they have, which we should be looking at, is why does that play such a big part? Let's say you relocate your compute from Sweden to Poland. For some reason, you move your computers, you do your analysis in Poland instead of Sweden. Well, all of a sudden, you're multiplying your carbon footprint by 46. And that's because Sweden has a lot of renewable energy, and Poland is powering a lot with gas and coal. So that's just same thing, same hardware, same software, just different place. Enormous impact. Now that's a bit far-fetched, right? Relocating cross-country. So let's say we stay in the same country, and we stay in Washington State, so northwest of the US. Don't change state, just move between two different counties. Here we are. We multiply the carbon footprint by 9 between two different counties, and that's again no real mystery. It's just because of the energy source, but it just shows that there's a great differences between places. All right. It doesn't mean we should stop doing science. It doesn't mean we can't do any compute anymore. There are lots of ways where all of that can work together, but we need to be mindful of all these components. So briefly, before talking about GreenDiSC, I'll do a quick brief about the Green Algorithms Initiative, which is the project we started in Cambridge 5 years ago. And the goal of that has been really to work with scientists such as yourself and say, lots of sustainability initiatives have been done in data centers and have been done by hardware manufacturers, and that's really important, but that's not enough. How can we empower computational scientists, people on the ground, to really understand their carbon footprint first, but then also mitigate it? And really, obviously, GreenDiSC completely plays into that as well. And we started with tools and then frameworks, and I'm gonna highlight some of that. So if you want to estimate your carbon footprint, I'm flashing this paper. If that's of interest, it's just a very short primer we published a couple of years ago now, just to kind of, how do you do it in practice? That's supposed to be a to-do guide. But there's 3 main strategies, realistically. The first one is using an online calculator. You may have used that for like flights. You go online and you say, what's the carbon footprint of flying from Vienna to New York? And they give you a number. So basically, the first tool we built with the Green Algorithm project was to publish this online calculator where people could just go online and understand the carbon footprint of running their computations. That's not the only approach. Obviously, there's having an embedded package. If you use Python, mostly because they don't really exist anywhere else, but if you use Python, you could put this package, which basically, it's like a tracker in your code that tracks what's happening while you're doing it. And then there's the third option, which is to be kind of server side. So if you work with the data center can be tracking what you're doing. And that's quite appealing when that's possible. So the online calculator I talked about, this is what it looks like. It may have changed a bit, but it's been quite stable. And the idea is you say, I'm running some code, it takes that many hours, this is the kind of hardware I'm using, and it gives you estimates of carbon footprint. And all the data is on GitHub. All paper titles, the methods, so happy to chat about it. And actually, we have a new version of the calculator now, which is same website but just different tab, which shows you, which specifically for AI. So if you do some kind of AI research, you'll appreciate that for AI you tend to have this training phase and then this inference phase, and that's quite good to have both of them side by side. Couple of other tools I'll plug just because they might be relevant. One specifically for HPC. So I mentioned this opportunity of having something server side. So that's an opportunity to just connect on your server if that's what you do, something like Slurm as a workload manager. If it doesn't ring a bell, just ignore that. And you say, well, what's my carbon footprint for the past 6 months? And basically based on log files that have been stored when you were doing stuff, it tells you, and it gives you metrics Some of them you wish you didn't know, like the impact of failed jobs. That's always a little bit soul crushing, but that's something to keep in mind. And now we're working on making that a bit bigger, making it a proper dashboard. And if you're interested in that, do get in touch and I'll loop you in. Biologists here, you may know about Nextflow, which is a very popular bioinformatic pipeline. And so there's a team at University of Tübingen that basically re-implemented the online calculator, but into a plugin to make it very easy to use with Nextflow. So it's a beta version now, but the first version should come out reasonably soon, the first stable version. So if you're interested, do check it out. And after all that, we decided to take a step back and say, okay, we've done all the technical, we've done the calculators, and obviously with some of these projects we keep working on, so it's not, it's never really finished. But can we take a step back and do a bit like the FAIR principles for open data? Can we think of some principles for sustainable computing? Science, we had to find an acronym. We ended up with greener, and that was a collaboration with funders, research organizations, and universities. And so we ended up with these greener principles, and I'm going to very briefly stream through the different principles before getting to the GreenDiSC. The first two, governance and responsibility. Who has a role to play? Who can make a difference? That's going to be quite boring. The answer to that is everyone and everyone. But really, we need these two aspects. We need bottom-up initiative. As you know, a lot of the sustainability efforts really come from grassroots, and that's brilliant. We need to keep having that. But to have systemic change, at some point, we need to have some top-down buy-in. And that's why having everyone involved is so important. Industry. Especially with computing, we can't just play on our side. We need to engage with industry, because we use industry-based cloud providers, for example. But so that's really critical that they're part of the discussion. And so in the UK, we've got this thing called the Concordat for the Environmental Sustainability of Research and Innovation Practices. It's not the most catchy name, but it is a quite exciting project. But basically, the entire UK research and innovation sector, so research performing organizations, university, and so on, but also funders came together and said, we care about the environmental impacts of the research we fund or the research we do, and let's commit to being more transparent about it, and let's accept that we do have a responsibility. And so that was quite strong, and that came out last year, and that's been really exciting to see that happen. But that's very UK based. More European, there's this thing that is actually endorsed by the Austrian Science Fund, which is this Heidelberg Agreement on Environmental Sustainability in Research Funding. Sounds a bit like a post-war treaty, but really it's just because we were in Heidelberg when we did the workshop. And this is lots of national funders from European countries as well as private funders coming together and saying, yeah, we agree. Same principles we were discussing before in the Concordat. They said, yes, it does matter and we want to do things. And actually GreenDiSC is cited in there as like kind of a model of what good certification looks like. So I was very happy with that, of course. And I'll show some of the guiding principles in a minute. Another thing we've been pushing for, and that's a bit more tangential, but hopefully still relevant, is to say, can we have environmental impact statements in grants? Is that possible? And funders, to some extent, were saying, well, it's very hard. We don't really know how we do that. How? And the French government, which funds a lot of research directly, especially in AI, they took another approach, which is say, let's just do it. And they actually now require every single application for their AI and climate funding, which are like dozens of millions of euros, to include an environmental estimate for the AI solution you propose, and you have to do that using the green algorithm online calculator I showed you before. And so that's how we started working together. But that's really interesting because it just shows that it's actually a simple step, and that really, really encourages more sustainable behavior. So that's been really successful. What about industry? Well, that's the big question, isn't it? And there's so much good work coming out of industry, like a lot of the kind of frontier findings, like Microsoft putting a data center underwater, trying to find out if it solves the cooling problem. It actually worked really well. Lumi, which is like one of the most sustainable data centers in the world by reusing heat and using low carbon electricity. So there are a lot of initiatives in this space that are really useful and some interesting work. The problem is there isn't really a kind of a high level ownership of the problem. And actually worse than that, the heads of AI both at Google and Facebook, they both don't believe into the environmental impacts of AI. They all say it's completely bonkers. We were actually kind of like attacked by Google at some point. That's a sign you've done something right. If anything else, the head of Jan LeCun, the head of AI at Facebook, also said, doesn't matter. This is completely crazy people. He called the French researchers working on sustainable computing medieval obscurantists. Doesn't translate very well, but you can see, doesn't sound any nicer in French, I promise. So that was completely crazy. And everyone said when they published that, this is crazy. And obviously, all that didn't age particularly well, because last summer, Microsoft showed their sustainability report acknowledging that their carbon footprint raised by 30% in 3 years. Google, 50% in 4 years or something. Now, let's set the context. These are two companies that were on very sharp net zero trajectories. They were decreasing emissions, and that was the target. They had very strict net zero targets. And yet, with ChatGPT and general language models and large language models, they all came out, and basically suddenly their targets went AWOL. What's interesting is Google to admit that this is mostly due to AI, and basically if they keep doing AI at the rate they are never going to reach their net zero target. To which you would expect the next sentence to be, therefore, we're going to do less AI. But unsurprisingly, that didn't happen. If we keep making our way through the greener principles, we get to estimating and reporting. And that's just this idea that we need to be transparent. So actually something we did in our group is to start to report the carbon footprint of our projects in all our papers. And that's been really successful. And it's been really good to see more and more people starting to take it up. And I think we can get better at it, but it's really exciting to see people acknowledging the carbon footprint of a project. And it doesn't detract from the project. It doesn't mean the project wasn't worth doing in the first place. It's just a way to be transparent about the environmental impact and negative impact of what we do. Acknowledging, quantifying is great. Reducing impact is good. All impact, not only energy. And we talked about the importance of location, and that's kind of an interesting example of how collaboration can be leveraged. Maybe you can use data centers in a place that has excess renewable energy rather than in your location, which has a lot of high carbon electricity. Or if it doesn't, vice versa, people in other locations come to you. So there are opportunities there. And actually, it's getting really old, this article, I think 2021, but it was kind of a very entry level of what can you do on sustainable computing. And it's still mostly relevant. There are probably a couple of bits that I would change today, but still mostly relevant. So if you're interested, you can check that out. Last two letters in greener, education and research. Education, I'm sure I'm not convincing anyone when I'm saying, well, it is, hopefully I don't need to convince you when I say that it's critical to embed sustainability in education the same way that you embed ethics in clinical training in medicine, is that it just becomes a normal part of how we do computational research, and new upcoming researchers and new upcoming software engineers, they understand that. And research, because there are so many aspects we still don't understand about computer power usage and environmental impact, and there's a need for some funded research in this space. And if you remember the figure, they've got the greener principles and they all feed into cultural change because there's this nasty thing called rebound effect. You make a tool 100 times more energy efficient. The main result is everyone is using it 1,000 times more. And that's great for innovation, that's great for progress. It's slightly less good if the original goal was to reduce your energy consumption. And that is actually critical because we have this paradox in the kind of digital and data center world, which is that for the past 30, 40 years, data centers have become consistently more energy efficient year on year. They are always getting better. Hardware is always getting more energy efficient year on year. There's no doubt about that. And yet, the energy usage and the carbon footprint of the sector has never ceased to increase over the past 40 years. And so that, that's the classic paradox that says we can't we can't rely on efficiency gains. And that's something a lot of manufacturing companies refuse to acknowledge, and big tech giants, which is we can't say efficiency gains are going to save us because this has never worked. So it's a bit baffling to me that it hasn't worked for 40 years, but they seem to believe that next year is the year it's going to finally happen. It's not. We just find usage for it faster than we find efficiency gains. So we need to change how we think about community computing. Part of that is to build a community. The community Kirsty presented is absolutely brilliant. It's a really vibrant community for software engineers, and it's a really great direction to take. And so that's really important. Another forum we started is this forum for environmentally sustainable computing, which is supposed to be for, not just software engineers, but anyone who is doing computing as part of their work. And it can be bioinformaticians, it can be astrophysicists, whatever. And it's a place to ask questions. So there's a forum where the questions don't disappear. If you're familiar with it, it's a mix between Slack and Stack Overflow. You've got the forum structure where the answer is marked, but you also have unstructured discussion through different channels. And so that's quite good. And after the longest introduction in the world of introductions, we get to GreenDiSC, but hopefully that was interesting background on the topic. But GreenDiSC is the kind of latest project in all this stream of saying, okay, what can we do? We build tools, we're trying to build communities, other people are building communities. There's so much great work. And one of the things that was missing is sustainability certification. If any of you do wet lab research, you know how successful they've been in sustainability. Things like Leaf or My Green Lab, they've really pushed forward sustainability project. It's just a way for labs and research groups to know how to become more sustainable. But there was nothing for digital. There was nothing for people doing dry lab research or computational research, however you call it. And that's where GreenDiSC came into play. So hosted by the Software Sustainability Institute that Kirsty introduced, we said, let's make one and let's make it the best possible version of what we think it should be. And that actually led us to take quite a few drastic decisions that are very different from what has been done before. Obviously, evidence-based, that sounds obvious. Free and open access is a brand new thing. There's no fee, all the criteria online, you can do it for free. You can actually do it without telling us. The criteria are there, you can do the right stuff. You just need to tell us if you want the certification itself. So this idea of free and open access goes with community-based. It means if someone builds a great resource, then other people can use the same resource. We don't need every university to build their own sustainability induction course. Like 99% of that would be the same between organizations. And that takes us to iterative, which is we're completely open to making it evolve very quickly. It doesn't need to stay the same for a very long time. And so that's a constant work of learning how we can make it better. And so we've got, bronze and silver and gold. So we've released bronze last year when we launched it, just under a year ago. Silver is coming up. It's being piloted at the moment. So actually, if you want to take part, you can sign up on our website. But the pilot and gold for coming up next. And here are some examples of criteria you could be looking at. So, on the compute front, bronze is all about inventories. It's about understanding what is our impact, what do we have, and that's a great way to identify potential improvements. Then you get to silver, which is how to change stuff. So, okay, well, you identified that didn't work, let's change it. And that's obviously harder. And then there's also this idea of having life cycle assessment, so just understanding the full carbon footprint and other categories of the IT hardware we purchase and things like that. So how does it work? There are two sets of criteria. There's the central team and there are the research groups. That's another difference. We acknowledge that a lot of it needs to be done centrally. If you want to affect the data center, you need to work with the data center team. You can't work with individual research groups. They have no control over the facilities. And the central team does a lot of very important work. So they have their own set of criteria. And if they complete them, they become facilitators to really empower research groups to take part. And they can get their own certification and everything. But ultimately, because of rebound effect, because of this kind of thing, we need research groups on the ground to be engaged, because otherwise we make the data center more efficient, people use it more, we're back to square one. And so really, there's these two sets of criteria, can be run in parallel, can be run independently. They don't both have to be done, but that's the option. If you're interested in that, that's very easy. You go on the website, everything is on there. The criteria open access. You can enroll yourself, so then you get access to slightly more detail, because they basically then we give you access to a Google Drive that has like resources and stuff. With this online space, it makes it easy to share resources. You don't have to use it, but then you've got them. So yeah, that's easy enough. Then there are regular application deadlines. So I didn't talk about the audit. I can talk about that later, but basically we base that on peer auditing systems. So it's external auditing, different organizations audit each other. That's a great way to actually exchange knowledge and things like that. But that's mostly it. The next deadline, the regular deadline, the next application, well, you can register whenever, but it's to submit the application once you've done all the work to get the certification. The next deadline will be end of July, I believe, 31st of July. And then there'll probably be another one about 4 months later. And I just want to make sure we have time for questions. I'm not going to detail GreenDiSC too much more, but then we can kind of dive into some aspects if you're interested later. There's a webinar recorded on the website as well. So if you want kind of the long version of this brief, you can check it out on the website. Again, the community is critical to GreenDiSC, and so the same thing, and the RSC special interest group Kirsty mentioned is so important. So it's been a really effort from the SSI with some support from Cambridge and UKRI. It's been really great team effort. And I'll leave you on just a couple of thoughts. Cost and benefit is what we're talking about here, right? We're saying, of course, we want to keep doing computational research. We just need to make sure that the costs don't get bigger than the benefit. And I quite like the way the Royal Society put it, where they say digital technologies developed and deployed, the same pursuit of net zero, I'd actually ditch that, must be energy proportionate. So they must bring environmental or societal benefit that outweigh their own emissions. And that's vague, right? But that has to be vague. And I think it's a sensible way to think about it, is just to say, we need to have a reasonable expectation that we're not doing more damage than good. And we're already making this argument when we ask for money. We say, we don't really know what the findings will be, but we definitely think it's going to be worth that much money. And so the same thing should be applied for environmental costs. And the final point is that the solutions we develop, the latest AI chatbot, the new Amazon smart speaker, this kind of stuff, even MRI radiology technology, they benefit the least populations who suffer the most from climate change. Low-income country population will not benefit vastly from the new smart speaker, but they will be at the forefront of the health impact of climate change. And so I don't really have an answer to that. It's just to say that this idea of cost benefit is more complicated than we think. We've got a Green Algorithm website with lots of details. Do check out the GreenDiSC website. Probably a million different people to think about, the projects I talk about today, but I've got some people on the screen here and some funders, and I think I'll leave it here and happy to take some questions, or I'm sure Kirsty as well.
Hey, thank you very much, Kirsty and Loïc, for your talk. It was very good to understand a little bit of background behind the environmental impact of computational work, and also learn about GreenDiSC. Okay, so first of all, there was something in the chat. So thanks, Kirsty, for posting the website and also the mailing list for the GreenDiSC. So you can find it here in the chat. Thanks a lot. There was also a question in the chat. So journals could make it mandatory to include the energy consumption of algorithms in the method section, especially for benchmarks of a new tool against existing ones. Yes, so this was partly...
That's a very good point. That's a very good point, and that's true. And that's something I know some journals have been thinking about it. They're just not quite there yet. We were actually, there was the collaboration workshop, which is the SSI annual conference last month, and there's a hackathon as part of that. And we were in a project. We ended up actually winning, so that was quite cool. But it was about how to facilitate that and how to have some kind of green metadata. So if you're interested in that, actually on the forum, I showed there's now a green metadata channel, and we use that to continue the project. If you're interested into how to standardize how we report carbon footprint for papers, that was in there. And yes, journals could do it very easily, especially specialist journals, because they all publish exactly the same thing. I mean, if you have a journal about, I don't know, statistical genetics, there will be a very small pool of analysis being presented. And so it's really easy to provide guidelines that apply to 90% of your authors. So yeah, they could do it, and that would be a great way. There's been some benchmarking, it's interesting. Some people sometimes realize that they made an algorithm a bit faster and a bit less memory hungry, but that's not, cool enough. So then they say, oh, well, look, if we calculate the carbon footprint, it's also a lot more energy efficient and it doesn't use as much energy. And so that's a cool example of where sustainability goes hand in hand with like higher impact and things like that. So there's definitely scope there.
Thanks a lot. And thanks for posting the GreenDiSC link in the chat and the green algorithms. I think that's also a very important tool to have. I have a question about what you said about the embodied footprint of the device we use. I think that's really an important point to extend the lifespan of the machines, of the computers, but also about deleting data. And I think, as you also mentioned, it's a matter of culture, a matter of awareness. If we are aware about how the impact of these activities, of course, we can be mindful. But I'm wondering whether institutes can help with some policy. Do you have any policy in place in your institute, or do you have any ideas in terms of like extending lifespan and about data storage?
Yeah, on the lifespan ones, there are lots of really good initiatives. So there are some universities that have like things like repair cafes and stuff like that. I know EPFL in Switzerland does it, for example. And that's where you can basically bring any piece of kit, your phone, your laptop, and they do it for other stuff that's not digital as well. And basically they get fixed for just the cost of the parts. So if you have a broken screen on your iPhone, they replace the screen and they just charge you the price of the screen, which is something like £2 or £3. It's always ridiculously low prices. But that, that would cost a lot of money to get it done anywhere else, and people probably wouldn't. And that's generally, it's great. It's generally done by students who learn about fixing this kind of stuff, and you get engineering students or computer science students doing it. It's absolutely brilliant. And that's such a straightforward way to extend life cycles. At a more institutional level, I know some organizations put it in their procurement policies. So for example, the extreme case is France, where all the IT system for the entire higher education system is bought through the same platform. And that's because France is incredibly centralized. So basically, every university or research organization in France, which is public, has to use the same procurement platform to buy their IT. And so every few years, they renew the contract for the platform to be providing all the IT equipment. As you can imagine, I think they end up being like the biggest IT procurement platform in Europe or something ridiculous like that, because it's dozens of thousands of people every year. And so they have a lot of power because everyone wants this contract. It's an enormous contract to get. And what they said is they've been extending warranty, expected warranty. I think that's something ridiculous, like 7 years now. And they said, if you can't provide 7 years warranty on the equipment you sell us, you can't bid for the call. And people did it because they're like, okay, that's a big pot of money. We're going to dance as much as we need to get it. So these are examples of ways to extend it.
There's actually a follow-up question regarding data storage by Sophia in the chat. So regarding storage policies, does it help to have something like a data steward?
It can. Kirsty, did you want to jump in on the hardware thing?
No, it's fine. You mostly covered it. It's the notion of power, I think, is very important in terms of whether you have the power to negotiate. And at a general level, you have it, but at an individual institution level, you often don't, which is the advantage of kind of clubbing together and negotiating together, I think, is really important.
Yeah. And that's why initiative like making repairability in-house, where you repair it yourself, is a way to go around that. Just okay, well, you're not going to provide the warranty, but we're going to do it ourselves. So people, but yeah, no, on data storage, yes, probably, definitely. I don't have a great solution for data. One thing is, I don't know if you all have to put data management plans together in Austria, but in the UK, they love that. That's every time you have a project with data, you need to put what they call a data management plan, and you explain what you're going to do with the data, how you're going to back it up, how you're going to make sure it gets kept long enough. The one thing that no one has put in a data management plan is deleting data. That's just not part of it. They don't say after such, and I'm not talking about deleting raw data that can't be recovered, right? If you've done satellite imaging, yes, keep the satellite images, great. If you've done like a very rare experiment, do keep the raw data. What I'm talking about is everything else. Is between the raw data and your final results, there are so many intermediary data sets that don't really, it's a bit the version of your document, which is report final, and then it becomes report final, and then you have final 3, and you get like that. The computational research like that, you end up with so many versions of it. We don't label them. The postdoc who worked on that will leave. We have no idea what the data is, and suddenly we've got dark data. We've got an enormous amount of data and duplicated data sets that no one will ever delete because everyone's terrified of deleting like irrecuperable data. But at the same time, no one will never use because, again, no one has any idea what it is, so you can't use it. And so something like data stewards and data management plans are really a key part in here, is to let's have clear rules about data. Obviously it helps also with not losing data, because even in terms of sustainability, if you have to rerun your big experiment, that's not great for the environment. So you don't want to be losing the data either. So yes, I mean, it's just data is such a clear win-win, where better data practices is a win for everyone, and not only for the kind of financial aspect or sustainability aspect.
Yeah, I think you touched on the software aspects as well, like the reproducibility. There's not generally a lot of effort goes into making sure that the data can be reproduced after the postdoc is left or in different scenarios. And improved software skills, I think, for that really help. The fact that you can kind of come along, the code used to develop the data, to create the data from your raw data to your process data, is well documented, and it's in kind of it was very clear what system it was run on. That kind of thing actually makes a huge difference. But there's relatively little incentive to spend the time writing that code or making sure that code is as usable as possible. So it'd be really nice to kind of incentivize that aspect as well, because it is an environmental saving as well as a time saving as well. You don't want to have to recreate something or spend hours digging through code that you don't really understand if you can possibly avoid it.
Okay, yeah, thanks a lot about that. I have another question about the GreenDiSC. So as far as I understand, so you can have it independently in the central sustainability team and in single research groups, right? Could it also be all together, centralized and the research groups together?
So they will still be two slightly different sets of criteria, but yes, the idea. Okay, so the ideal situation is the central team does it. A lot of their criteria are not so much about the change they make, a little bit, but it's mostly about making resources available. So they do the inventories of all the data centers. They do the inventories of what the recycling, electronic waste recycling is, all this kind of stuff. And then the research groups take part. And when the research groups take part, they don't have to do all these things because the data is directly provided to them by the central team. Instead, they can really focus with what they can control. And I see a question about LEAF in the chat. And so, anyone who has done LEAF will know that this is how organizations do it anyway. They will have a central LEAF representative in the university, which will coordinate all the group to take part. And we just decided to formalize that to give recognition to that central team, which is doing a lot of work anyway. And make sure, and so ideally you get both of them together so the research groups don't spend too much time and the central team is here to support. We've just made it in a way that if you are a research group and your central team is not ready, fine, you can still do it. It will be a little bit harder, but it won't be impossible. It just means you will have to ask the IT team for some information instead of it being given to you straight away. But they can be completely independently. It's just there's this option of doing it together, which is the way it's set up when you register. If your organization has already registered, you get added to the same organization online, and that means you can see the shared data.
Okay, thank you very much for clarifying this. Are there
and maybe
any...
I'll just
Yes,
jump in on the question on because I didn't quite answer that. The last question in the chat which is to say,
Yes.
is there a way to integrate the GreenDiSC scheme with the Leaf Lab certification scheme in order to not duplicate structure? On purpose, GreenDiSC doesn't actually duplicate anything. I've been very careful to not put anything beyond digital. So for example, there's nothing about the heating in the building, heating in the office, because I know a lot of organizations, they have campus sustainability, things like Green Impact or whatever. You know, I'm sure you've got some initiatives like that in Austria. And so I didn't want to start having a lot of schemes that overlap each other, and then you end up doing slightly different things, and it's a lot of duplicated effort. Instead, I said the one missing bit that no one else is doing is digital. That's, you can't really have a digital part if you're doing with Leaf, and you can't really do it if you're doing My Green Lab and Campus and stuff like that. So I'm like, so all the criteria are very specifically designed to be only digital, to not overlap too much. Now, so you can't really merge them in that way. Now, in practice, that can be for the central team, that can be the same people. And that usually is. The central sustainability people who are the Leaf representative, they can also take on running out GreenDiSC because they've got the contacts and they know how to run the system. It's going to be, actually, GreenDiSC will be a lot easier for them because they don't have to do any of the auditing. Like in Leaf, the central person has to audit everyone. With GreenDiSC, the auditing is a peer audit. So actually, the central team just has to facilitate, but they don't have to do a lot of legwork. So it's a little bit different in that sense. But I know there are some European efforts with things like Spark Hub, which is this new European platform for sustainability. And so basically GreenDiSC will be the digital side of that. And so once that becomes part of Spark Hub, GreenDiSC will be, then you only have one platform where you can do everything, and there's no duplicated infrastructure at all. It's helping.
Okay. There's another question. Would buying refurbished hardware reduce the footprint of purchasing hardware?
Yes. Yeah, because, one thing we can, when you calculate carbon footprint, you can say, okay, this laptop has a 5-year life expectancy. So I'm going to take its fabrication footprint and I divide it by 5. And basically you allocate 20% to each of the 5 years. If you keep it longer, the manufacturing cost is 0. Then, at least you've absorbed it as part of your scheme. So yeah, I mean, obviously when you buy refurbished hardware, you save another one from being built. And you save this one from becoming electronic waste. So that's a no-brainer from sustainability. It's brilliant. Last one in the chat. I was wondering if there's an easy recommendation regarding the carbon intensity. Yes, and that's something, because of time, I didn't want to spend any time on that. But yes, there are a lot of fluctuation over the course of a day. So for example, Kirsty is in Scotland, and I'm in the east of England, south of England. All the renewable is being produced in Scotland. They do wind all the time. They don't know what to do with all the wind they produce. The energy grid in the UK is not that great. And so basically we can't transport all the renewable energy being produced in Scotland to the south of England, which is where everyone lives. And that's a problem. That means that there are times of day where we need to switch on gas turbine in the south of England just because the renewable is there. We just can't use it where we need it. And so that means it fluctuates a lot in the UK. Like, you'll have times where the carbon intensity is very low, times where it's very high. And sometimes just running a job 10 hours apart, you can reduce your carbon footprint by 60% because you're making the most of this renewable time. It depends, if you look at France, that doesn't happen. All their energy grid is powered by nuclear, so it's incredibly stable. Basically, you're going to gain 5% between, different days, but it's incredibly stable. Most countries aren't that stable, and therefore so this is called like carbon aware scheduling to run your HPC job, because we don't always need the job just now. We can have the job later. And so I'm going to put something in the chat which is called CATS, and that's actually another product of the SSI annual conference, and that's actually something that came out 3 years ago, I think. Other winning project, just to say we've got a good track record on sustainability at the collaboration workshop, and we called it CATS, for carbon aware task scheduling. And that's basically a piece of software that tells you what is the most sustainable time of day to run your job. It works mostly only in the UK so far, and that's because in the UK we've got a forecast of what is the it gives you a 48-hour forecast of energy carbon intensity. But if you find a similar piece of software made available in Austria, you can very easily plug it in, and that could work just as well. So yes, using time of day. Sorry, that was a bit of a long-winded answer, but yes, using time of day is great.
Hey, good. Thanks for the link in the chat. There's also another question. Do you have an estimate how much energy is consumed by transferring, for example, 1 terabyte of data over the network? This happens a lot instead of accessing input data for analysis centrally and just send a script that will analyze them.
Yeah, networks is a weird one because internet networks, and it's a bit different if you transfer data inside your data centers because then you need the hardware and stuff like that. But if you transfer data over the internet, the main factor that decides how much the internet grid in your country, which decide how much energy it uses, is not actually how much data goes through it, is the size, the capacity of the network. So if you imagine the internet as being, pipes with water going through them, how much water goes through them doesn't really change the electricity usage. What matters is the size of the pipe. And the size of the pipe is calibrated for peak time. So you want the evening of the football World Cup, you want everyone to be able to be in front of their streaming service and watch the TV. The night Game of Thrones is being released, you want everyone to be able to stream it at the same time, because you need to be able to deal with peak usage. And that's what decides how big the pipe needs to be. And most of the day, you're not going to be anywhere near peak usage. And so transferring data, it's not to say it has no impact. It has energy usage, it has a role to play, but it's not a clear-cut role, because if you don't transfer data, the pipe is not going to shrink. The pipe's staying the same. It's just not going to be used as much. There's still an impact because it's not a perfect relationship, but it's a small impact. But there's an impact long-term. If you start, if we all stop doing streaming, internet will be smaller. We're not going to build as big internet and as big pipes because there won't be a need for it. So in the long term, if we start being more frugal and be more reasonable about how much data we transfer and how much data we need and stuff like that, then yes, in the long term, it may play a role. But network is a tricky one where the mechanisms are quite different from regular computing, if that makes sense.
Thanks a lot. Any other question? Okay. We'll say thank you in the chat. Well, I guess we are done here. Yeah, I would like to thank Kirsty and Loïc for the very interesting presentation today. Thanks a lot for joining us. And of course, thank you to everyone in the audience. And enjoy the rest of the afternoon.
Thank you all.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.